Welcome back. The death of an on-duty Montgomery County police officer late last year is renewing calls for Maryland to make greater use of technology, specifically ignition interlock. These are devices that prevent a person from starting his or her car unless they blow into a tube to prove that they're sober. Many other states require ignition interlock for people who've been convicted of DUI, and there's already a push underway in Annapolis right now to get Maryland lawmakers to approve new legislation this year. Kurt Erickson is with the Washington Regional Alcohol Program and joins us now. Welcome back. Good to have you with us.
Happy New Year.
This is not new technology we're talking about, ignition interlock, the basic premise of it, the idea that technology's been around a long time, but there's still a belief that in Maryland we're not taking full advantage of what this technology can bring in terms of keeping drunk and impaired drivers off the road.
You know, I think that's probably the best way that I've heard it put, which is they're not taking advantage of a proven effective technology that's certainly not new, and right now 25 states have it. 25 states now require these in-car breathalyzers for all persons convicted of drunk driving, including the majority around Maryland. So Virginia, West Virginia, and Delaware all require this, and they require it because it works. The states that have had this on have seen significant drops, 50 to 90% drops in DUI recidivism, at least according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And for the states that have had it even longer, like Arizona and New Mexico, they've seen respectively a 40 and a 45% decrease in alcohol-related traffic deaths because of this technology.
Maryland is lagging.
Oh, Maryland is absolutely lagging on this issue. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because I think it really speaks to, quite frankly, an insensitivity to this issue. And the fact of the matter is that right now you have 25 states that have this. You have the majority around the Maryland itself that actually have it. And that, you know, the fact of the matter is that the majority of DUI bills don't make it to the governor's desk. It's not just these ignition interlock bills, which have been championed for years, but the majority of DUI legislation doesn't make it up to the governor's desk for his consideration.
Why?
Again, $64,000 question. One of the things is again, insensitivity, and I'll give you a couple examples. One is, you know, for years we used to hear that, you know, there was an unwillingness in Annapolis at the General Assembly to fine or to jail DUI offenders because the breadwinner, in that case, the person's arrested for the crime, may not be able to support his or her family. Well, we're not championing that. We're championing these ignition interlock devices that still allow the person that's convicted to drive to work, to earn a living, to drive to school, drive to church, drive to their daughter's softball game, do whatever. They just can't do it after drinking.
The other day, over the course of the last several days here on News Talk, we've spoken with Roger Berliner. He's a vice chairman of the Montgomery County Council and the new head of COG, and with an influential player in Annapolis, by any measure, Maryland Senate President Mike Miller. And we talked about the pros and cons we talked about where Maryland is and where Maryland might go. Here's what they had to say.
If you're a repeat offender.
Not
okay.
first time.
Not first time. I mean, a housewoman, a housewife, or something like. These are very expensive, by the way. This is not some charity thing. These people make a lot of money off these things. It's like $100-some a month to have one of these things in your car. Plus, you got to pay to have them installed.
The Assembly has to do this. It's just not okay for a committee chair whose practice is defending drunk drivers to be able to stop this. The leadership of our General Assembly must take control and make this happen.
Your thoughts listening to Roger Berliner and Mike Miller talk there about, in Berliner's case, where he thinks the state should go. And in Miller's case, you get the sense that we don't want to go too overboard in how much we embrace ignition interlock.
Right. I appreciate the comments of the new COG chairman. That's comforting to hear. But in terms of the Senate president, I can't disagree with him more. The fact of the matter is that he's talking about these should be more apt for repeat offenders. The fact of the matter is when somebody gets arrested for drunk driving, that may be their first offense, but most national studies show that an average person drives up to 80 times impaired before they're first caught. So it may be the first time that they're caught, but make no mistake about it, it's not the first time that they've driven drunk. He's talking about them being expensive. It's $60 to $80 a month for the average offender in the case in the state of Maryland to actually have these instruments installed on their vehicle. And again, they work.
Maryland State Delegate Ben Kramer joins us now. He's with us by phone from Annapolis. Delegate Kramer, we just heard Kurt Erickson say that other states have embraced this technology in a much more robust manner and that Maryland is lagging behind. Does the death of Officer Noah Leota reinvigorate the conversation in Annapolis this term?
Well, it certainly has put a spotlight on the issue, and I think the media has sat up and taken notice of what a plague we have in the state of Maryland and our lack of interest in addressing it. The fact of the matter is the ignition interlocks do save lives, and quite frankly, the bill would apply to anyone, and this is the operative word, convicted of a drunk driving offense, convicted. So when you hear those who say, oh, you know what, it's a little too much for a first-time offender, well, as Kurt just said, every study indicates that those who are actually caught have driven somewhere between 85 and 250 times before they were actually arrested. And quite frankly, the first drunk driving offense in almost every instance receives a probation before judgment, a PBJ. Mm-hmm. So it is not a conviction, and therefore, by the time they are actually convicted, in almost every circumstance, it's almost always the second offense. And that's what we need to do because, again, every study indicates that the earlier an ignition interlock goes on the car of a drunk driver, the more likely it is to modify their future behavior, reduce recidivism, and I'll tell you an astonishing statistic, Bruce, is that since October of 2011, there were 16,000 times with the limited ignition interlock program that we have now in the state of Maryland, but 16,000 times that people in that program were locked out from starting their car because they were legally drunk.
Wow. Oh, this data that is then available to law enforcement and others, the number of lockouts. I had never heard that.
Yes. Astonishing statistics. 16,000 times they were prevented from getting behind the wheel of a 4,000-pound missile and putting you, your loved ones, and the rest of our families and friends at risk.
So were they all at .08, the 16,000 lockouts?
Yes. 0.08 or higher.
Wow.
They were legally drunk.
Wow.
It was almost 150,000 times since October of 2011 that people blew some alcohol because when they're in this program, they are required to have zero alcohol.
Gotcha.
And yet there were 150,000 times when they did have some alcohol.
Ben Kramer, I want to get to the next issue. We still have a couple minutes left, but I don't want time to get away from us. The first hurdle that any bill like this has to clear in either the House of Delegates or State Senate is the Judicial Proceedings Committee in the Senate, the Judiciary Committee in the House. Those committees are overwhelmingly made up of lawyers, and that's, no indictment there, no aspersion. But it's a committee of lawyers, and these are lawyers whose bread and butter is what they do 9 months out of the year when they're not in session. It is not the money they make the 3 months of the year that they're in session. And many of these people have practices where they work to get drunk drivers the best possible legal outcome possible. To what extent is there a conflict of interest in Annapolis?
Well, the fact of the matter is that we have a legislature that is comprised of individuals who do have jobs outside of Annapolis. But anyone who could not step back and recognize that our constituents, that the lives of our residents come first, should be embarrassed and ashamed if they do not support this legislation, because it is the only known step, the only measure that actually can, in fact, save lives and will save lives. Bruce, there are going to be several thousand bills introduced this session. This is the only one we can say for a fact will save lives.
Kurt Erickson, do you think the lawmakers in Annapolis, particularly those on the committees I referenced, House Judiciary and Senate Judicial Proceedings, have a difficult time separating out their lucrative day job, so to speak, from this other work they do as part-time citizen legislators? Are they reluctant to craft a new environment that might be good for safety but bad for their bottom line?
I mean, I think you're always going to have problems with a citizen legislature. That's what you're talking about. But I think the issue that I'm trying to make a point of is that I think there's issues that are transcending this. I think there's a level of apathy.
But if you don't think there's a problem, say so. I'm saying, do you think there's a problem in this area that I'm laying out, or do you say no? I trust them to make good judgments independent of their personal finances and their personal income.
Well, I think there's always the potential for conflict of interest. I don't think there's any question about that.
I'm not asking about potential.
Yeah. Well, I understand.
I mean, I've covered Annapolis 30 years. I've heard the same thing the whole time. If you don't think there's a problem, you don't have to say there's a problem. But I'm asking you, do you think there is a problem?
I think there's a problem in terms of conflict of interest, but I also think it's equal to that of a general apathy on this issue. The best example I can give you is that 30% of all traffic deaths in this state are caused by drunk drivers. That's 2014 figure. Frankly, it's the same figure at 2005. It's a figure that's unchanged. So despite population changes, despite the number of crashes that annually happen on Maryland's roadways, there seems to be an acceptance that 30% is okay for lives to be lost in drunk driving crashes in the state.
I only have 15 seconds left. Ben Kramer, the odds of a bill like this moving this session, what are they?
Quite frankly, Bruce, I would never speculate with regard to that. Certainly, the focus is going to be I think, there's a spotlight on it. Noah's Law this year is going to be a premier piece of legislation before the General Assembly.
I got to jump in there because of the clock. I apologize. Ben Kramer.